Welcome to the Voices of the River webinar series brought to you by the Even Load Catchment Partnership. This series hosts water industry experts and activists who present on important water-related topics with the aim to educate, inspire, and empower the public towards positive action towards our rivers. I'm Jennifer Lanham from the Cotswold National Landscape.
And I am Sam Frith from Earthwatch Europe.
Today's episode is Tackling Emerging Chemical Threats like PFAS in Water. Natalie Sims is a policy advisor at the Royal Society of Chemistry, specializing in environmental health. She has previously worked in academia, focusing on chemical pollution in rivers and wastewater, environmental policy consulting, and on water policy and chemical pollution topics for both the UK government and EU institutions. We're really delighted to have you here, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. If I just share my screen, hopefully that's all working. Does that look good?
Yeah, that's good. I can see it.
Amazing. So yeah, thank you for the invite to speak again. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about tackling emerging chemical threats like PFAS in water. So firstly, I'll just very briefly introduce the Royal Society of Chemistry and our policy work a bit more widely. I'll then talk about the water policy topic and in particular contaminants of emerging concern and give some background. I'll then focus on one group of CECs in particular, so PFAS, or otherwise known as forever chemicals. I'll then talk about what our asks have been to government and what we've been doing in this area, what we'd be looking to do next, and then finish off with some conclusions. So firstly, if you didn't know, the Royal Society of Chemistry is the UK's professional body for the chemical sciences. So we have over 60,000 members globally, and we work at the heart of the chemical sciences community to create a future that is more open, that is more green, and is more equal. So we publish new research, and our journals have a commitment to open access, and we bring people together to support collaboration, and that's usually through conferences, meetings, or events. We also care about protecting the environment and about tackling discrimination. And we're also passionate about ensuring that cutting-edge chemistry is accessible for wherever it's needed for the good of society. And this is encapsulated in our overall purpose, which is to help the chemical science community make the world a better place. So, I think I can't seem to move the slide along.
No, I'm stuck on the globe.
Yeah, hang on. There we go, sorry. So just to talk a little bit about the policy and evidence team at the RSC, we're quite a small team, but what we do is we work to gather evidence and provide expert advice to keep policymakers and the public informed and up to date on current scientific issues. So we work on a range of topical issues where chemistry makes a strong contribution to policy debates. And as a team, we work broadly on 3 different areas. So that includes environment and health policy, research landscape and economy, and then also sustainable chemicals and chemicals regulation. So there's obviously a lot that we can work on within these topic areas, but our policy priorities tend to be guided by our membership, but we do consolidate that with other evidence and other expertise. And really our ultimate goal is to act as a credible and independent voice to campaign for evidence and science-based policy. And just to mention some of the outputs that we produce as a team, so we do produce quite a diverse range of different outputs. So we create policy positions where we distill some of the key evidence for a topic down along with our understanding of the policy context. And then within these, we'll usually outline our asks or recommendations to government. And we've also produced explainers where we condense complex topics down into accessible information. And I've just got a screenshot from our microplastics explainer, which was from our previous plastics policy work that we've done in the past. But we haven't just done written outputs, we also have done webinars and panels where we act as a convening body to bring different stakeholders together. We've also created and been involved in podcast series and also YouTube docuseries work. And as well as this proactive and planned policy work that we do also do rapid response work as well. So this could be responding to government consultations or responding to current and relative news stories. And just to briefly mention some of our impacts as a team, so our chemical policy colleagues ran a really successful campaign on PFAS in drinking water in the last couple of years, and that I'll touch on a bit more later. We've also had our policy advisors invited to give evidence at Parliament, so for example, at the Environmental Audit Committee. We've also had our team engage at the United Nations level as well. So that's been in the establishment for the United Nations Science Policy Panel on Chemicals and Pollution. And we've also had representation at the UN Plastics Treaty negotiations as well. So really our policy work isn't just done on a UK level, but we do also try and do our influencing work internationally, both European level and further afield. And now on to our water policy work stream, and in particular, our work on contaminants of emerging concerns, or CECs. So our water bodies, including our rivers and lakes and oceans, they make up 71% of the Earth's surface, yet they're increasingly contaminated with toxic cocktails of chemicals and plastics. So contaminants of emerging concern are a particularly troubling subset of pollution. These are substances that are often not controlled or monitored in the environment, and even at low concentrations may be harmful to human health or to ecosystems. So examples include, but are not limited to, microplastics, pharmaceuticals, including antibiotics, PFAS, sometimes known as forever chemicals, and also things like antimicrobial resistance genes, which are carried by bacteria and fungi. And sometimes the name emerging concern can be a little bit misleading, as it might suggest that these contaminants we're talking about are new. But actually, many aren't and have been used for decades and are already quite widespread in the environment. So in reality, when we say emerging concern, it often means that they've not been regulated or that they've been previously undetected in the environment. So how do these CECs get in to our environment and into our waters? So basically what I want to get this, apologies, the writing is a little bit small, but hopefully you can see and get the general gist. What I really want to show with this is that the CECs in the environment and how they enter, the sources are really complex, and how they move about is also really complex and diverse as well. So there's lots of different sources. So we have not just sewage overflows, but also our treated wastewater. So our traditional wastewater treatment plants were never developed to remove chemicals from their wastewater streams, and this could result in them being present in the final effluent. But it's not just wastewater, we also have runoff from agricultural fields, and we also have runoff from urban areas as well, so residential areas and roads. And really when CECs enter the environment, they can be very mobile, and there'll be different influences and external factors to how a contaminant might move and where it ends up. So why are we concerned about CECs in the environment? Well, we have worries due to their potential toxicity, their persistence, and their ability to accumulate in organisms. So some CECs can mimic our hormones, which in turn can lead to neurological development or reproductive effects. So one particular famous story that you might have heard in the news has been about the feminization and behavioural changes in fish in some rivers due to exposure of low levels of the contraceptive pill in water. And that's come about from our wastewater effluent streams. There are also concerns around antimicrobial resistance too, which has been highlighted as one of the top 10 global public health threats by the World Health Organization. So we know that environmental levels of antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance genes can be drivers for antimicrobial resistance. And when we talk about exposure and how a human's exposed to CECs in water, when we look at water specifically, they're exposed through recreational activities like bathing or swimming, or through our drinking water. And although this exposure may involve low contaminant levels, the long-term effects of this exposure to different CECs are not well understood. And just to briefly mention some of the water policy context in the UK, this is just to show that we have different legislation covering different aspects of water quality. So we have the Water Framework Directive, which covers water bodies in terms of their water quality and quantity, and that covers some of the chemical monitoring. Then we also have legislation that covers our treatment of our wastewater, and also for the treatment of our drinking water and ensuring that the quality is intended for human consumption. So this is just to give the context that we have obviously these different pieces of legislation, but there may be some overlaps, but have distinct focuses. So just to mention PFAS, a specific example for CECs. So PFAS is otherwise known as per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're a large class of synthetic compounds that have been used throughout society since the 1940s. They're known as forever chemicals as they do not break down very easily in the environment, and that's ultimately down to their chemical structure. Because of their structure, though, they often have what we see as desirable properties. So they can be greaseproof, they can be waterproof, non-stick, and also flame resistant. So as a result, PFAS has been widely used in industry and in consumer products, in products like non-stick cookware, in food packaging, in stain-resistant clothing and in furniture, also in cosmetics, and widely used in firefighting foams as well. So why are we concerned about PFAS in particular? Well, there has been a variety of serious health hazards associated with PFAS exposure. So it's important to remember that not all PFAS will cause these issues, and it will also depend on what PFAS and the level of exposure. However, these chemicals have already been found in human bodies around the world, and given that PFAS takes so long to degrade, this could lead to intergenerational problems. It is also worth mentioning that there are several toxic PFAS that are already banned under certain legislation. So this is for PFOS, PFOA, and PFHXS, and these are all banned under the Stockholm Convention. So the Stockholm Convention is a global treaty which aims to eliminate and restrict the production and use of persistent chemicals. Unfortunately, due to this persistent, they are often frequently found in the environment. So this is just a map showing the evidence of PFAS in waters in England. So we have PFOS on the left and PFOA on the right. So just to mention, these are environmental water samples. It's not in drinking water samples. However, analysis has revealed that more than a third of water courses tested in England contain medium or high-risk levels of PFOS and PFOA respectively. So these are the two PFAS that have been included in the ban under the Stockholm Convention. However, they're still present in the environment due to their persistence and historic usage. And contamination of PFAS is likely to be an issue in watercourses when they are nearby sites that have used firefighting foams. So this includes airports, military sites where they've had fire training areas, also high-risk sites near industrial facilities that have produced or used PFAS. We've found high levels near wastewater treatment plants, also landfill sites which have products that may contain PFAS that leach out, and then also ash from incinerators. So PFAS can withstand high temperatures, and if it's not high enough, the PFAS might survive and stay in its current form, or it could break down into shorter chain PFAS, which also can cause problems. And unfortunately, due to this widespread contamination in the environment, this has also meant that we can find PFAS in our drinking water. However, there has been recent changes in the Drinking Water Inspectorate for England and Wales regarding PFAS that have actually just come into effect last month. So the current regulations, there are 48 different PFAS that are monitored in drinking water. And in the old limits for PFAS were that each individual PFAS was looked at effectively individually to ensure that it didn't surpass the 100 nanogram per litre in drinking water. So that's from this here. So above 100 nanograms per litre is considered high risk, and that would trigger action. However, in the previous guidelines, all the PFAS were looked at individually. So this meant that the total amounts of PFAS that you could have in your drinking water could be higher than 100 nanograms per litre. However, these guidelines have since changed, and they came into effect last month. And what this means now is that the total amount of 48 PFAS cannot exceed 100 nanograms per litre. So previously as well, they were only looking at 47 PFAS, and now this year they're looking at 48 different ones. So this is a good step in terms of having greater protection for human health, and it actually goes further than guidance for those in the EU and also in Scotland, which enforce the same 100 nanograms per litre, but only for 20 chemicals. And for the last couple of years, some of my colleagues in chemicals policy have been campaigning for stricter measures of PFAS in drinking water. And one of our asks was including and enforcing a limit of cumulative PFAS. So everyone was really pleased to see the changes and guidelines that are coming into effect this year. And if you're interested in that campaign, I don't know if the slide's going to be shared around, but I'm happy to send links or slides afterwards. So we've seen some progress on PFAS in drinking water, but what about the wider environment? So we know that we have widespread contamination of PFAS, and the issue is once they're out there, they can be really challenging to manage due to that persistence and high mobility. Remediation is an option, but it will be challenging and it will be expensive. So there's a recent research done by the Forever Lobbying Project, which estimated that just to clean up existing legacy pollution in the UK, it would cost an estimated £428 million each year, and that would be for the next 20 years. And that also assumes that PFAS emissions would stop immediately. So remediation is going to have to play a part in the solutions. However, we at the RSC policy team have been working to campaign on how we can stop pollution from getting into the environment in the first place. And this is where I'm going to talk a bit about some of the work we've done in looking at CECs in environmental waters and some of our asks in this area. So last year, we've researched more into how we can tackle CECs in environmental waters. So through research and engagement with our community and other experts in the field, we developed a policy position on tackling CECs in water. And we've also turned this into a shorter explainer piece that's shown in the middle here. After we published these, we've also ran an event in Parliament, and that was co-hosted with the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, where we invited academics that inputted into these policy positions to talk about their research on tackling CECs. And this audience was with parliamentarians and other members of the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee. So this was really to raise awareness of how this is as an issue, but also to talk about some of the solutions involved as well. Again, I'm happy to send these around as links if you're interested to find out a bit more. But now this is all published, we're using this as a basis to explore some of our asks in a bit more detail, and also using these documents to have relevant stakeholders more of those in our network as well. So I've used PFAS as an example today, but many of our asks are relevant to our wider work on CECs. And as I mentioned earlier, we know the sources of CECs in the environment are diverse and complex, so there isn't going to be one solution to tackling this problem. It is going to require concerted and holistic action to tackle CECs in water. So we can broadly group our CEC asks to government around 4 different aspects. So we have monitoring, we have risk assessment and management, we have tackling sources of pollution, and we also have global collaboration. So as I previously said, this aims to be complementary to remediation efforts. And I'll keep this quite high level today, but if you are interested in this work, again, happy to send around any links. So firstly is the importance of monitoring and monitoring data. So this can allow us to identify hotspots, it can teach us where we can prioritise action, and can also allow us to see long-term trends. However, we need to adequately resource monitoring programmes to allow us to build up comparisons, for example, between different locations or between different timescales. So the Environment Agency has had their funding cut over the last 10 years, and we know that monitoring is expensive, so we do need an efficient strategy for this. There's been loads of good work in the scientific community in terms of monitoring, about developing methods, allowing us to see CECs that we've not seen before, allowing us to do retrospective screening where we can, samples that were taken previously, we can look back on and look at CECs as well. And there's lots of innovation in the digital side of things as well, and how we could potentially use AI to also help us with our monitoring data. One area that I think is really particularly exciting is in the area of citizen science. So obviously within citizen science, if we're using it to look at water quality, we need to make sure that there is quality assurance. And this obviously wouldn't be replacing the monitoring programmes that the Environment Agency do. However, citizen science can be complementary to other monitoring techniques, and it can help fill information gaps. It's also really great for getting the community involved, and also raising awareness and in the public eye, and keeping it on policy agendas too. Also, just to mention, if you are interested in citizen science and not doing anything this afternoon, one of the RSC's interest group, the Water Science Forum, are running an open webinar on citizen science for environmental monitoring. This is happening at 2 o'clock this afternoon. It is being recorded too, so yeah, if you're interested in citizen science, please come along to that as well. I think when we talk about monitoring, More broadly, we want the data to be accessible and transparent to help us foster accountability and trust. And more generally as well, when we talk about monitoring data, we ideally want to be looking at monitoring beyond water as well. So we also want to look at soils and sediments, and ideally wildlife and humans as well, as this will give us information of the fate of CECs once they get into the environment too. Next, we have risk assessments and management. So risk assessment allows us to evaluate hazards and exposure to determine potential risks. It can help us set guideline limits and identify chemicals we might need to restrict. And it can also help inform monitoring priorities for the most concerning of CECs. However, our traditional risk assessments tend to focus on individual chemicals, so they're not really fit for the purpose. And when we look at CECs in the environment, we often have really complex mixtures, which may have synergistic or cumulative effects. So this means effectively when two or more chemicals combine, they can have a greater, stronger effect than they would have if you'd been exposed to just one of them. And this is a really challenging thing to be able to assess. So we really need to support and invest in improved risk assessments to understand chemical mixture. One area that's considered a next generation risk assessment is the area of new approach methodologies, or NAMs. So these are modern scientific techniques which can be used to assess the safety of chemicals, and they could help reduce the need and reliance on animal testing too. So it covers quite a broad range of techniques, but it can include cell-based methods and also computational modelling and artificial intelligence to predict how chemicals and chemical mixtures could affect humans and the environment. So it's another really exciting area of research. So next on our sort of 4 different areas of asks, we have tackling sources of pollution. So I split this section into subsections, and again, I'll keep this reasonably high level. But firstly, I wanted to talk about end-of-pipe solutions and the idea of implementing a stronger polluter pays principle by making additional treatment to remove CECs from urban wastewater mandatory. So I think generally when we look at water quality in the news and politics at the minute, there is a lot of talk about sewage overflows. And I think we are definitely taking a step in the right direction with the new Water Special Measures Bill that's currently going through Parliament. However, if we want to tackle and have clean water, we're going to need to tackle more than sewage overflows. And we know that with wastewater, wastewater effluent, even when it's been treated, will still contain some of these CECs. And where we have point sources of pollution, for example, like we do in wastewater treatment plants, this can allow targeted interventions to prevent CECs from entering water bodies. So it basically provides opportunities for us to apply extra treatment before that water enters into the environment. So there are advanced treatment methods that are available that could help remove to some extent the contaminants that are found in wastewater streams and get through. And these are technologies like advanced oxidation processes and activated carbon filtration. There are also challenges associated with these technologies too. They are often very expensive. You might have to deal with quite concentrated hazardous waste after you've used the technologies. But to an extent, you do stop some of the pollutants getting out into the environment. And it's also better to have those pollutants concentrated in one place where you can then deal with them, rather than obviously them all dispersing and then having to deal with the remediation costs at a later date. When we're talking about these as well, there is also considerations for the treatment site in particular with regards to size and space availability. And I just wanted to mention with this some of the changes that are happening at the EU level and with their Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So as part of they have recently revised their directive, and as part of these changes, they've included systematic monitoring of microplastics and PFAS in wastewater and in sewage sludge. And they are also requiring advanced treatment of their wastewater to remove micropollutants like CECs from wastewater streams. So this payment is in line with the polluter pays principle, and the new law will ensure that the costs of the advanced treatment will mostly be covered by the industry responsible, rather than water tariffs or public budget. So in the EU level, they have identified that it's the pharmaceuticals and cosmetics industries which create the most micropollutants in wastewater. So it's these industries that will be required to pay at least 80% of the costs for their removal. And the idea of that is it's to limit the burden of costs upon the public. And this is, so one of our asks has been to implement the stronger polluter pays principle in the UK by having this additional treatment to remove urban wastewater. And this is one of the asks that we want to explore a bit further this year. So we want to look at the opportunities and the barriers in the UK for us to adopt a similar approach and a similar revision to our urban wastewater treatment directive. I did just also want to mention the importance of nature-driven solutions. Sustainable drainage systems include rain gardens or retention ponds and also constructed wetlands. These solutions help reduce pressures on wastewater infrastructure. They help us improve our water quality, and they can also help us enhance our resilience to climate change. This is a constructive wetland that Wessex Water have developed to look at cleaning effluent wastewater. That's been as a final polishing step. And these constructed wetlands, they're really effective for removing nutrients and some organic compounds. There will still be challenges if they'd be effective for removing all CECs or particularly with persistent chemicals. So it's not likely a perfect solution. However, this is also why we say we need concerted and multiple actions in order to tackle CECs and water. I think nature-driven solutions do really have a place in how we manage our water quality and quantity. And also, just very briefly, I wanted to mention responsible innovation and use. So we also need to be looking to push proactive prevention by minimising pollution before it enters the environment. So this is through sustainable regulation. So we need to ensure that chemicals are safe and sustainable, and also having industry responsibility. So products should be designed with safety and sustainability in mind, for example, the use of non-hazardous chemicals, and also promoting industry to take full life cycle accountability of their products. So also dealing with the end of life of them and not just making the products and then putting them out there. And arguably, if we reduce the use of hazardous chemicals, we should reduce the amount that those hazardous chemicals enter the environment. And this might be a good option for tackling diffuse sources of pollution, for example, such as road runoff, as diffuse sources of pollution can be really difficult to trace and regulate. So, for example, if you remove a hazardous chemical from use in road tyres, then that hazardous chemical then won't be released as it won't be there in the tyres. And I think in general we can say that while some chemical release is going to be inevitable, ensuring that those that enter the environment cause minimal harm is really critical. So to mention, colleagues in the wider RSE policy team are both working on sustainable regulation and also on circular economy and handling of waste. And then the final aspect of this tackling sources of pollution is the idea of non-technological solutions. And this is the idea of promoting non-technological solutions and to raise awareness in the public to achieve clean and sustainable water. So these can be complementary to some of the technological solutions that we've mentioned in terms of advanced treatment technologies. So for example, through public engagement and awareness campaigns, we can inform people about the environmental impact of certain chemicals that they use and also empower them to make sustainable choices. And I've just used pharmaceuticals as an example here, but this could be to do with promoting proper disposal of medicines, so not throwing them down the drain so they end up in our wastewater, or not throwing them in the bin where they might end up in our landfill, but instead promoting the correct practice, which is to return unused medications to the pharmacy. And also promotion of vaccines to reduce the reliance on medications too, as obviously prevention is better than cure. And then the final ask in our sort of 4 different areas is the idea of global collaboration. So we are facing a triple planetary crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, and chemical pollution. Whilst pollution is a global issue, it's not felt equally. And when we talk about pollution more broadly, so we include air quality and legacy pollutants, pollution had contributed to 9 million premature deaths in 2019, with 90% of those occurring in low to middle income countries. And this was found from a study by The Lancet done in 2022. So it's a global problem, but it's not felt equally. Also, the other thing with pollution is that it doesn't tend to stay local. So contaminants, particularly persistent ones, can travel very long distances through air and water and reach very remote areas. So when we think about transboundary pollution, we're going to need to have international collaboration. And when we think about global efforts, we need to focus on sharing expertise, sharing best practices, data, and also infrastructure as well. And just to mention in terms of the RSC and some of the work that we are doing in this area as well, so I briefly touched upon this earlier, but we've been involved in the establishment of the United Nations new intergovernmental panel, which is going to be focused on chemicals, waste and pollution prevention. So this is currently in the process of being established, but it aims to provide evidence-based guidance on managing chemical pollution. This panel will join the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity Loss. And what's really key about its establishment is that it's finally putting chemicals and pollution on par with climate change and biodiversity loss. So the RSC has been really instrumental in advocating for the development of this panel and also in the process of shaping it. And I think it's in its final year of being shaped this year. And to mention the next steps in this water policy programme. So we've been keeping an eye and doing some influencing work around the Water Specials Measures Bill that's currently going through Parliament. So for example, that's one that is highlighting predominantly sewage overflows. So we've been working to do some wider engagement with those in the committee about how, if we want to have clean water, we need to do more than looking at sewage overflows, and we also need to have more protection against CECs like PFAS. We'll also be further building upon some of our specific asks from our CECs policy position, and that includes looking at the barriers and opportunities for applying additional wastewater treatment in the UK, but also exploring more on the specific diffuse pollution sources, for example, like road runoff or landfill. And I think as a general, when we talk about clean water, it can be really easy to focus on the wastewater. However, we do know that there's lots of different pollution sources, and to have clean water, we do need to be looking at those sources too. So yeah, it'd be good to do some more work in those areas as well. So just in conclusion, to finish off, so pollution, and in particular emerging chemicals in the environment, is a complex problem and requires concerted actions. Monitoring and having effective risk assessments can enable us to make informed and evidence-based decisions, and we really need to be supporting these and research and development in these areas. And we also need to do more to stop CECs getting into environment in the first place, be that greater source, control at source, responsible innovation and use, but also promoting the non-technological solutions as well. So that was my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Just to say as well, if you're interested in any of this work or you're working in similar areas and want to get in contact, please drop us an email. We're always really interested to hear what others are doing. Yeah, and that's, I think I can end here. Amazing.
Thanks so much, Natalie. I mean, for us on the even load, it's quite a concerning topic, so it's great to know how much work's going into this, and that there's things that we could possibly do. And actually hearing about the citizen scientist side of things actually has really piqued my interest. Just quickly, we'll go to questions and answers now. There are a couple of questions in the chat, but do raise your hand if you would like to ask a question in person.
Really quickly, Natalie, before we go into questions, could you let us know how we can join that 2 o'clock citizen science webinar?
Can I send a link to this chat? Yeah, so let me just send a link across the chat. Let me just get up. Oh, it's in the presentation.
Because I think some of us will just be jumping straight into that.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Do you know, is that looking at water samples or soil samples, or both?
I think it's predominantly water for that webinar. Sorry, I had this open earlier. I will send it though, if you want to carry on with questions, and I can do both.
That's fine. What we'll also do is we'll put it into the, so all of our recordings are available to watch again on YouTube at Even Load. And when we get it edited and everything and put it out there, we will add that to the description of the webinar breakdown. So it'll be too late, come to think of it. Never mind.
I took a screenshot, so I can share the screenshot, and people might just have to be able to do their own searches.
Yeah, I did have this open, and it's just, yeah, anyway.
It's fine.
That's okay.
Just quickly, I'm going to read a couple of questions which are in the chat. I've got one from Trevor. He said, searching for solutions and causes for I'm guessing Lough Neagh, which is also a water supply for 40% of the local population. Has there been any noticeable deterioration during and after the COVID years? It appears that there may be.
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Let me just read it in the chat as well.
It's near one of the top ones.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I don't know if we specifically have done any research in looking at PFAS levels before COVID and after. It's something that I can look up and maybe let you know. I actually don't know if there has been. That would be really interesting to see. I do wonder if there's potentially also been changes in analytical methods or which PFAS they're looking at. I don't know. What's it, Trevor? Is this been any particular PFAS in particular? I don't know if you.
Trevor there to ask and carry on. Trevor?
Yep. Okay. You can hear me, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
None in particular, but the rapid deterioration in Lough Neagh vis-a-vis the blue-green algae, the obvious thing. It's not solely on Lough Neagh, it's on all water bodies. And the sudden decline of invertebrates within the water bodies would suggest, I mean, it could well be largely agricultural, but it seems very coincidental with the COVID years and all the hand sanitizers, etc., that has been washed down the drain in the last 4 years.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. I thought that was related to PFAS. I think as well, during COVID, I know there was a rise of people taking part in more recreational activities outdoors as well. And I think that also potentially had an impact in terms of our water qualities. But yeah, I think agriculture, when it's to do with nutrients and when you have eutrophication in rivers, does tend to be linked to, wastewater streams and agricultural. It'd be interesting to see if there's any data out there that looked at potentially before COVID and what happened afterwards. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a specific answer.
No, certainly there are people looking at the invertebrate collapse across the board. But I referenced Lough Neagh because of the size of it, the catchment of it, and the obvious decline in water quality due to the huge blooms of blue-green algae. Yes, I know it's a multiple source question, and I know there are a lot of forever chemicals in it going back to the 60s and 70s when PCBs were pumped into it in tons. Yeah. Why it ever got registered for use as a water supply for so many people, I fail to understand, but that's our local government. No, it would be interesting to hear if there's anyone doing research on the hand sanitizer or the other compounds involved in the COVID outbreak washed into the waters, and to see if there is a connection. Thanks.
Yeah, I've made note of that. And yeah, I can definitely ask around. Yeah, thank you for that.
Right, I'm going to move on to one of our previous guests of Voice of the River. Kirsty, you've got your hand up. Have you got a question?
Hi, yeah, I'm Kirsty from Surfers Against Sewage. Nice to see you, and thanks, Natalie. That was so interesting. Thanks. I have two questions really. The first one is like with the regulator. What are they required to do in terms of monitoring? Like, what the Environment Agency? What are the parameters and the kind of yeah, and obviously it's not sufficient, it's not enough, hence your policy work. Yeah, that'd be really great to hear what they're required to do at the minute.
Yeah, is that drinking water or?
Oh, sorry, our waterways, sorry.
Yeah, in waterways. So we have the Water Framework Directive, which does have chemical monitoring included in that.
Yeah.
In terms of the approach that we take in the UK, we take a risk-based approach. So we don't monitor everywhere, mainly because we just don't have the capabilities to do so. So high-risk areas tend to be focused on and they monitor, and then results can be, say, extrapolated, or if we don't monitor it, we might assume that it's okay. Within those, within the chemicals under the Water Framework Directive, it won't necessarily include emerging threats. That can be sometimes picked up by the Environment Agency separately, or water companies run the Chemicals Investigation Programme as well, and they have some good monitoring data from that too. In general, though, I think, as you say, we just, at the minute, we aren't monitoring enough, particularly of these newer PFAS or PFAS in general, for microplastics. So we have a real issue in really understanding sometimes where hotspots areas are, or potentially we're missing hotspots because we're not monitoring enough. But I think that's why some of the developments in terms of citizen science can be potentially promising, but also developments in terms of passive samplers as well that basically could help make monitoring more efficient. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, yeah, aside from the WFT, which just doesn't feel, especially for that emerging contaminants, it's a real problematic thing.
I think as well, because the WFT, it's 6-year cycles. And in general, the river basin management plans are really hard to go through, and they're quite hard to understand in general. And I think that is an issue that's been picked up by them. But they are big, complex documents, really. But yeah, I think in general, I think the Environment Agency do a really good job with the resources that they have. And I think that's why we are calling on government to adequately resource them to allow them to do more monitoring.
And I think that's the kind of next question. A few people in the chat have put, like, how can we all help? How can we, like, monitor? Like, what's that, like, pathway for citizen scientists to own this space? Because we know there's going to be loads, like, in this room alone, that we're all, like, eager to get involved, aren't we?
I think what's really positive in terms of, I guess, water news is that we have so much more awareness of our water quality in terms of, I mean, it's not positive, obviously, what's happening with sewage overflows, but the public has really driven that in terms of pushing that up the political agenda and forcing government to take action. So, I mean, Labour have come in and it's one of their top priorities is tackling sewage overflows. And that has really come about from greater public awareness and that public media pushing. And I think there's been loads of positive news about citizen science as well, and also them raising awareness and also keeping that conversation going and also pushing that again towards political agenda. And I think when we have the focus now in terms of water, in terms of sewage overflows, and I think there are conversations to be able to widen that out further, to say, look at PFAS. I think PFAS is another one where we're seeing increasing media stories and coverage on this. I think we have had some really positive news of PFAS in terms of the Drinking Water Directorate, that they've changed their standards this year. And again, that's been really from pressure from public and other groups calling government to drive action. So I think with citizen science, I would definitely recommend going and getting involved. With regards to our work, if you are members of the RSC, if you follow the RSC, we do sometimes do public-facing campaigns where you can write to your MP. So I'd recommend following us, and then if there's opportunities, you can get involved in there. That also might be, opportunities. But I think currently the public can definitely drive policy action. I think that's really important. And I think as well in terms of talking about the non-technological solutions, and that's all about involving the public as well in this conversation as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, thanks, Sam and Jennifer, for these sessions. They're really brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. Moving on from that, I mean, I think a lot of the time it will be finances that will be sort of preventing people from helping. Do you know of any sort of projects that might be going ahead where, you know, citizen scientists can do testing for PFAS or other chemicals where, you know, the costs might be covered?
So I don't know if it would be more related to big research projects that have citizen science included in their projects. So I was involved in one recently with Will Gaze's group in Exeter, where you could just contact them and say you're interested, and they could send you a kit. And that's quite an accessible way that you can get involved, where you don't necessarily have to pay the costs. In terms of driving citizen science yourself, I'm not sure if there are any funding opportunities or like funding pots that you can dip into. And yeah, that's a really interesting question, maybe worth looking into to see how others, if it's not a part of a big research program, is there ways that you can get involved?
Julian, you've been very patient. Thank you. Another previous guest of ours. You've got a question. Go ahead.
Not at all. Well, just a thank you to Natalie for mentioning nature-based solutions. You know, we have to work with nature, because otherwise we're not going to be able to afford to keep our economy going. I'll try and keep it brief. Cromhall that you used as an exemplar is appalling, frankly. I mean, it's a great effort, but it achieves 29% phosphorus reduction. A third of that is dilution with rainfall. We've been moving back on constructed wetlands. I'm a bit of an old boy. I did the first scoping paper for putting nature-based solutions, reed beds and swales on CSOs, storm overflows. They're very cheap. They're very robust. We have an identical reed bed swale system working here locally. It's been run at 4 times its design capacity. No problem at all. We're also joined by Dr. Lucian Gill, who formally introduced reed beds into the UK, and I don't know if I can encourage him to speak about this, because his reed beds remove 99+% of phosphorus, and furthermore, he's dealt with pretty well all these nasty toxins at some of our major industrial sites. But you need to know this. He's been excluded from the municipal water industry, and the most appalling dirty tricks have been deployed against him. I don't know how much he wants to say now. He's speaking, I hope, in a month or so at this forum. Lucian, have I prompted you enough? I'll shut up now. Thank you, Natalie.
Causing trouble again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the problems you've talked about, we solved years ago, including PFAS. We used it, Leeds Bradford Airport, they used, as all airports do, firefighting foam. And their system, we built them a proper reed bed. The constructed wetlands are not reed beds, they're dilute and disperse. And so you see an apparent reduction, but nothing really happens. What if you're talking about destruction of chemicals to eradicate them, then you need properly constructed soil-based and what have you. And in that case, we have found them applicable to all your pesticides, herbicides, PFAS, oil, everything. And yeah, Julian's right. We didn't upset too much industry. We gave the WRC the first chance. And their view was, these systems are much cheaper. There's not enough money in it for the water industry. We're damned if we go and let you go in and do anything. So I ended up working for industry. And we solved virtually every problem that they had. And the scale was on 1 meter cubed, up to our largest systems, which were 500,000 tons of water per day, up to potable standard. So, as he said, I'm doing, I think it's March the 4th. I'll do a talk on what we have done. But I think your real point should be that for example, we don't need new reservoirs. 99% of the water is containing sewage as well. It's being flooded everywhere. We need to alter our catchment strategy and to rebuild our catchments. If you rebuild catchments in the proper way, using proper reed beds and what have you, then you could remove the flooding, you could remove all the pathogenic problems, you can get rid of your PFAS, because you're dealing with very big dilute and disperse contaminants. And in order to do that, you have to have something that the water can go through continuously and remove, whether it's your microplastics or your PFAS. on a permanent basis. And that's the only way we're going to do it, because it's far too expensive to tanker stuff to a treatment facility and try to use electrics and what have you. Your biggest source of PFAS was the huge fire at our main fuel depot down south, bottom of the M1. And I was called in on that because of the work we'd done at Billingham. And they had 30,000 tons of concentrated firefighting foam that had been used to put the fire out. The fire brigade did not want to use it because it was PFAS. A certain Tony Blair was concerned about his emissions. He ordered them to use it. So they put the fire out. I used to work with the fire brigade, and if it's burning, you let it burn straight up, get rid of it. They put it out. That caused huge pollution. They had 30,000 tons pumped into tanks. We were the only people who showed that we could deal with it up at Billingham. Before we got there, the water authority, I won't say which one, we can guess, accidentally opened the taps one evening, and the PFAS went all the way down the river out to sea. So you're up against a lot of odd things, mainly against political inertia. I think Julian would say, as I do, that we've been in and out of Parliament for God knows how many years, and nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
So I'll try and give you an integrated viewpoint on March the 4th.
Yeah, we
Something
look
like that.
forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucian.
No, that's fine. Yeah. And any questions afterwards, fine. Yeah. But well done. You need to bring it all together, and you need to publish it and keep publishing. They won't do anything if you don't. So, sorry.
Would be
cynical.
also good if you have any publications that you can share with us as well on that. I don't know if you've looked at bioaccumulation in your reed beds in terms
If you had what, sorry?
Bioaccumulation of PFAS when you're talking about in your reed beds. Have you looked at
At first, you might think so, because the partition coefficients would lend you to think that you're going to get bioaccumulation. That's only because it takes time. There are certain rate constants for every chemical. Phenol, the rate constant is less than a day, so you can use them almost from day one. Some of them, like PCBs and pesticides, take 10, 15, 20 days of incubation in the system. And they'll build up in that time. But once they're going, you're a continuous flow system, they will be continuously degraded. So PFAS will be gone, as will everything else. Yeah, it's a question of designing a bioreactor using soil, bacteria, and plants that will do the job. So it can be done.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to 4th of March. Yeah. 4th of March.
Don't ask any awkward questions. No, ask as many as you want. Yeah.
Looking in the chat box, we've got a really interesting question from Sarah Green. Sarah, are you around to ask your question personally?
Yes, I am.
Fabulous. Go ahead.
Hi, I live in the Colne Valley, West London. The western border of London is the River Colne. In Hillingdon, we used to produce a lot of London drinking water. One area after another has been polluted. The most recent one is right in the centre of the Colne Valley, where the HS2 works were built through the drinking water protected areas. And now we have the main pumping station, Blackford. We've got FOI results which show they're in tier 3 for PFAS. And so there isn't a clean water source nearby to dilute. And the pumping station can't be used. This is really a terrible loss. The water is being abstracted from 90 metres down in the chalk aquifer, now polluted with PFAS. I mean, this is really awful. And as local people, we used to have good water. What can be done about this? What political pressure? Who is responsible for taking action?
So,
sorry.
Can you just quickly explain what the different tiers are for us, for those that don't understand?
Yes, of course. So it's split by 3 different tiers, low risk, medium risk, and high risk. So low risk refers to levels of PFAS that are less than 10 nanogram per litre. Medium risk is below 100 nanograms per litre, and then high risk is above 100 nanograms per litre. So they're the different tiers, and those tiers will have different guidelines from the Drinking Water Inspectorate associated with them. So when it reaches tier 3, that is when, action really needs to be taken for it to be dealt with. With regards currently, there has been changes in terms of the Drinking Water Inspectorate guidelines this year that we have to look at cumulative levels of PFAS. But these are actually still guidelines, so they are enforceable under the Drinking Water Inspectorate. But it's through the wholesomeness clause that drinking water companies need to ensure that their drinking water is wholesome. And actually, we're still pushing at the RSC, as the RSC at the minute, to have PFAS put into statutory requirements and statutory limit instead. So that is like lead is a statutory limit in the Drinking Water Directive. And we want PFAS to be the same. So it's not just through this other clause, which is legally enforceable still, but we want it to have automatic legal consequences if water companies do, if they have exceeded high risk tier limits. So we do still have our drinking water in PFAS campaign ongoing, where you can contact your MP. I can share the link around here. Again, just it's that call to make it statutory limits. And yeah, usually when PFAS exceeds 100 nanograms per litre, water companies have to report to Ofwat, and then they will say, oh, you need to do X, Y, Z. It's usually blending water sources, so diluting the contaminated PFAS source with a source of water that isn't contaminated to help dilute it and bring those levels down, or they can use activated or granular carbon as well to remove PFAS. But yeah, I can share that link. Yeah, it's really challenging, I think, to get people to hear. And yeah, I hear stories all the time of people coming from PFAS contaminated areas. And yeah, so I hope that's helpful.
Next in the chat, we have a question from Harriet. Harriet, are you around to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it for you? Harriet? Okay, Harriet has asked, is there any campaign or targets, is there a campaign that targets surgeries, hospitals and pharmacies that are really stressed and need appropriate disposal for unused medicines? Is the RSC pushing for national government campaign on these lines?
So I don't know of any specific campaigns actually that are looking to push appropriate disposal of medications. I know there are certain research groups that have been working, so chemists working with pharmacists to address this and how we can address behavioural changes. So they had some research that came out looking at how people did dispose of their pharmaceuticals, and they found certain things like people were more likely to dispose of their liquid pharmaceuticals down the sink and maybe more likely to throw their solid ones in the bin. So currently, I'm not aware of any sort of national campaigns doing this. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what the RSC are doing as part of our asks in this context, we are raising awareness to government in terms of an example of a public awareness campaign could be how we dispose of our medications to push that, because I think we've seen that as a gap, and there's not that we've observed anyway.
Thank you.
You can just actually take them to your local pharmacy.
Sorry,
and they will take you can take them to your local pharmacy, and they will accept them. So that's, I think, just the call to action on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Another quick question. Do you have a full guide of all the actions that individuals can take? You mentioned a few examples on pharmaceuticals, but I wonder if there's a full guide that we can help to circulate.
I don't think we actually have a guide of all the sort of, I guess, public-facing asks. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we have that to circulate. I could, yeah, other than the slides that maybe mentioned some.
What we do is we like to have a call to action for people, and I think that's something that we can kind of pull together and maybe put back to you just for a quick look over and make sure we've hit the key ones, and then maybe we can publish that as one of our online resources on our website. I think that would be a good idea.
That sounds amazing. Yeah.
Fab. Well, I am looking at the time. We've hit our hour, unfortunately. I'm sure there's lots more questions out there. But as usual, with the end of our sessions, I ask our guest, Natalie, what is your favourite book, or favourite or most inspirational? Can you point us into that direction?
I'm rubbish of choosing favourites, so I've not chosen a favourite book, but it is one that I've read recently that I found really inspiring, which has been Invisible Women. Can't remember the name of the author, but if you're not aware about it, it's all about the data biases and gender inequality in terms of our data, and how this can negatively impact on our everyday lives. And I mean, it's obviously quite sad, but I found it just really fascinating and eye-opening, and yeah, would recommend anyone to go read that. Really
It's on my list, and the author is Caroline Carrido Perez.
Amazing. Yes, that's it. Yeah, incredible book. Yeah, really eye-opening. But yeah, sorry, not water related, but yeah, hopefully still recommendation.
Fab. And while I have everyone here, I would like to remind you that our next Voices of the River on the 18th of February is actually going to have a guest of Luisa Orsini, who's a professor of Birmingham University and CEO of Water Damphne Solutions. And she's going to be discussing how Damphne Water Solutions is actually fighting water chemical pollution. So leading on from this one really nicely. So anyone who's interested in that, please do join us on the 18th of February at 12:30. Keep an eye on our social media and our Eventbrite for that link so that you can join us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Natalie. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much for the invite. And
thank you, Natalie. Thanks.